Before we get started, I want to thank you for allowing me to share some of my research on Jeremiah and the Lost Tribes in general. It's one of my favorite subjects because of two things, actually. It helps verify God's reality, which is one of the most important things a Christian can do. And also, it verifies the truth of the Bible, which is the second most important thing, because there's an awful lot of stuff in the Bible that we can't prove, we can't verify, and it's the most important stuff, like you're saved by faith. The Spirit will come and indwell in your heart if you act in trust of God's Word. Who can prove that? Who's been to heaven and come back? But with the Lost Tribes, it's just a matter of verifying prophecy. And there's hundreds and hundreds of prophecies in the Bible that have already been fulfilled. And that proves that God knows what he was talking about, and he told us what was going to happen. And if that's all true, then maybe we can take a little chance on this stuff that we can't prove. Okay? You gave me some questions to work with here. So we'll start with the first one. It says, "Tell me, Jack, what do you feel that Jeremiah 1:10 is all about?" Well, Jeremiah 1:10, let me read that to you, okay? "See, I," and that's God talking, "I, God, have this day set thee over the nations." It doesn't say just nations, it says the nations. "And over the kingdoms." Well, despite the fact that the house of Israel, that nation, that kingdom, was already gone at the time of Jeremiah, they were gone by at least 100 years or more, and many of them are still relocated up north between the Caspian and the Black Sea and under the Black Sea. The house of Israel, but the house of Judah is there, and those are the nations that he was set over. Okay? And what's he supposed to do? "And to pull down, and to destroy, and to throw down." Well, he certainly did all that. He prophesied against the house of Judah, but he didn't prophesy against Babylon. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar liked what he prophesied, because he told the people, "Go to Babylon, you'll be all right. 70 years, you'll come out. You'll be okay. Don't fight it." Of course, they didn't listen to him. They said, "Oh, well, tell us what the Lord said." And he told them, and they said, "Well, no, we didn't want to hear that. So let's go to Egypt. We'll be safe in Egypt." And he said, "No, you won't. Nebuchadnezzar will come down there and kill you all anyway." And that's exactly what happened. But because of his prophesying, Nebuchadnezzar gave him a large break. He sent his captain of the guard, Nebuzaradan, to let Jeremiah know that whatever he wanted to do was okay, and he would give him the substance to accomplish that. He could stay with them, he could go, he could do whatever he wanted, and he would be assisted by Nebuchadnezzar. But that isn't where the verse ends, you see. There's another part to that. The other part says that he was supposed to build and plant. Build and plant. Well, wait a minute. After he goes to Egypt with the Israelites, and then they get killed, he briefly comes back to the Promised Land, and that's all we know. He's gone. He's out. He's gone from history. Who knows where Jeremiah went? And so, as a result, we see his throwing down and his destroying and so forth, but we don't see his building and planting. Now, if God isn't a liar, and the Bible is true, truly the Word of God, then Jeremiah had to build and plant someplace. Where might that have been? That's what this study of Jeremiah is all about. Jeremiah in Ireland. So let's take the second question and get on with that study of Ireland. It says, a man came to Ireland in 583 BC. He arrived in Ireland. Who was this man? It was Jeremiah. How do we know that? How do we know it was Jeremiah? Okay. Well, one thing that I've come across in all the years of my study is only one piece of what I term as solid evidence that Jeremiah actually came to Ireland. Over the years, many people have emailed me after reading my pages on Jeremiah and the Lost Tribes and said, please let me know what your source is. Please point me to the book that says Jeremiah came. I've been looking and I've been finding nothing. And that's what I found when I did my initial research into Jeremiah. I had several books, the Irish Chronicles and so forth, histories on Ireland. And some of the names are there. Olin Falla is listed in several of the books. He's a historical character, but sometimes he's listed as a king. Sometimes he's not listed as a king. Sometimes he's listed at a certain time in history. Other times he's listed as much later, a couple of centuries later. And there's no real solid way to put this all together. That's what God does. Once you really deeply study any one of the subjects in the Bible, things that God has done, you'll find that he never goes 100%, it seems. He always leaves that little bit left over to leave a little door open, not only for the skeptics, because they certainly use that. Well, you can't prove that he went to Ireland, there's no proof, and da-da-da. But that little open door for the skeptics is also our chance to act in faith, to trust God that what he said is true, like the building and planting. We can't verify he built and planted, not from the Bible, and not definitely from history. So we have to take it on faith and fit that in and say, okay, I believe that. And I certainly believe that. And just me talking to you right now is a faith act, because I can't prove it either. See, as I said, I've only got one solid piece of evidence. And that's not a joke, solid, because it's a rock face. Okay, there's a rock face over in Ireland, and it's supposedly near Jeremiah's tomb. Okay? Well, let me stop here and digress just a bit. There's only one place in the world, one place in the whole world that claims Jeremiah's tomb. That's Ireland. You can find claims to David's tomb and Solomon's tomb and Abraham's tomb, Jacob's tomb, but not Jeremiah. Not in the Promised Land. Nowhere else in the world has anybody said, this is Jeremiah's tomb, except Ireland. Okay? Here's my solid piece of evidence. That rock face, here it is here. Let me zoom out just a little bit so you can see that. Now this rock face, I know it looks like a bunch of squiggles and you can't make it out, okay, and it's hard to see. You can't see these names and things down the sides, but mainly these little colored squiggles, make it a little bit closer to that, these colored squiggles here are designating a celestial picture. So there's, let me see if I can help you see this. that says sun. Okay? And the line goes in here. There's the sun. Okay? There's the earth. There's the moon. Okay? So the way this picture forms, you can go through astronomy, through the history of astronomy, and find when this configuration existed. 583 BC. 583 BC. It pins down the date, period. Okay? Now what this other stuff here is, you notice this shape here has a squiggly line that goes away from it. Take a look at that. That squiggly line right there goes away from that, and then it stops there, and you see another squiggly line go here, and it ends there. This is Jeremiah's ship. Okay? And on that ship, there were 5 people. These 5 lines depict those 5 people. So it starts out from one place, it makes a voyage, it stops, and notice here, there are only 4 lines on the ship. And 1 line has been left off. Well, the story that explains that is that Jeremiah, when he left the promised land and went to Egypt, and even then came back with the Israelites that went over there, he took along Zedekiah's daughters. Zedekiah had at least 2. It says daughters in the Bible. 2 daughters, because Zedekiah was captured. His sons, 7 of them, were killed in front of his eyes. His eyes were put out, and then he went to prison and died in prison. You see, what was happening there was Nebuchadnezzar was following Babylon law, and cutting off the line. He thought he cut the royal line of David off, but he didn't, because he didn't know all of Mosaic law. Mosaic law says, and you'll find this in the early books of the Bible, where some women came to Moses and said, oh, we don't have a male heir. Well, we should have some kind of inheritance. What can we do about that? So the law accommodated them, and now the female line, if there are no males to inherit, the female can inherit. So the daughters were the throne of the nation of Israel. The nation of Judah, actually. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't know that. See, he thought he cut the line off. Jeremiah took the 2 daughters, and the reason one is out of the boat, because the story says that he stopped in Spain on his way to Ireland. And we'll get to that after a little bit. There was a reason why he stopped in Spain. He didn't stop for food and water. Okay? He married off one of those daughters to one of the kings in Spain. Then he went on up to Ireland and landed there. Okay? And that leads us to the second question, because when he got to Ireland, he married the next daughter, that last daughter, named Tia Tephi, and you can find her name all through the history books of Ireland. But you can't quite make the connection between Jeremiah and Tia Tephi. See? As I said, you get that little loophole. Okay, the next question is, why do you think the Milesian king, the high king of all Ireland, let this man have complete control over Ireland? Well, I take one small exception there with the word complete. It wasn't complete. He did a lot of things in Ireland. As one person has taught that it was part of the diary of Tia Tephi, that he was allowed to do these certain things. he established a lot of laws. The history books of Ireland acknowledge that a guy named Ollam Falla, which is one of the names that he had there, Ollam Falla, established a good set of laws. Not only that, while we're at it, we'll get to the Milesian king in a second. Not only that, he established what they call in Ireland fairs, F-A-I-R-E. They have a fair. Okay? There were 3 fairs he established. Well, don't we remember that in the Promised Land, part of the religious rituals of the Israelites were 3 feasts, is what they call them. In the Bible they're called feasts, but actually the word that's translated feasts means set times. There's Passover, and there's 3 festivals or feasts at Passover. There's Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. And then 49 days later, there's Pentecost. That's when the Holy Spirit descended and Peter preached the first sermon and 3,000 came into the church at the same time. And then in the fall, there's the Feast of the Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles. So 3 times a year, all the males were to go, at least all the males, were to go to Jerusalem and celebrate these different set times. And Ireland had 3 fairs. Not only that, when these festivals happened, everybody was exonerated and they got their jewelry back, all their debts were canceled for the time. Anybody disturbing the peace was thrown in jail, and if I'm not mistaken, it's been quite a while since I read this, they were put to death. Penalty of death. You don't mess with the fairs. You come and you be a good boy. So along with that kind of amnesty for the fairs, they also had established cities of refuge. Does that sound familiar? You know, there were 12 cities of refuge in the Promised Land set up for the manslayer. He'd run to the, if somebody killed somebody by mistake, he could run to one of these cities of refuge and live there until the high priest of the time died, and then he was free. And nobody could come and get him. The law wouldn't touch him. The people who were the family of the person that he killed couldn't touch him. Had the same thing in Ireland. Wow. You know, well, that was a coincidence. You know, they had the 3 festivals. They had the amnesty, and they had the cities of refuge, and plus the laws. Another thing that Jeremiah did when he was there was he established colleges. Well, he was out of the priestly line. You know, he was out of the priestly line. It says, I'll read this to you. The words, Jeremiah 1:1. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests. Hilkiah was a priest. And maybe Jeremiah was and maybe he wasn't, but he's out of the priestly line, and that's an important piece of evidence because the priestly line was only Levi, right? None of the other tribes contributed priests, officially contributed priests. As soon as the nation split in 921 and Israel went its own way, they went to paganism right away, and they had priests from anywhere. You know, anybody could be a priest in the northern kingdom of Israel. But the southern kingdom of Judah, which was the official kingdom that was doing it God's way, even though a lot of paganism got in there, Solomon even went to paganism, but about every seven kings, every 7th king turned it around and did it right. Okay? All the kings of Judah were out of the line of David. They're all out of the line of David except Saul, but that was when the Israelites and the Judahites were together. as one nation. When they split and Judah became a separate nation by itself, every king was out of the line of David, which is what we'll get to after a bit, was ordered by God through Jacob when he split the birthright. So Jeremiah was a Levite. Okay? He wasn't out of the tribe of Manasseh, which we'll see in a few minutes. He was out of the tribe of Levi, a priestly line. Okay? The Milesian king. Well, this old man just shows up with a young girl, a young woman, and his scribe, that would be Baruch. Somewhere in some one of the books you'll find that this man, Olamfala, arrived in Ireland, and he had with him Barak, Brug. See, before they wrote everything down and letters were established between groups, several different spellings were put forward for a lot of different names. And especially with Hebrew names, no vowels, it could be DN, which was the tribe of Dan, could be Dan, Dun, Don, Gin, lots of them. So he arrives and he marries the young woman to the High King of Ireland. Whoa. Just walk in and say, here she is, and now let me make the laws, and we'll establish some colleges here and do things right. How did this Milesian king just accept this guy? Let me dangle a little something here. For the same reason that the Druids just kind of faded away and allowed Christianity to blossom in Britain, starting in 37 AD. How could that happen? That was the national religion. One of the kings, King Bran, had left the throne to become the arch-druid of all Britain. But Christianity just kind of took over. And the Druids, oh well. Same thing with the Milesians, because they were all Israelites. They were all Israelites. This is a long story here about the Milesians. Milesian is the name of the people who come from the city of Miletus, over in the Aegean Sea, okay, the northern Mediterranean. Okay? Their history is pretty well documented all the way back there. They had several settlements in Spain. There were 4 or 5 brothers in Spain that had settlements there. 3 of them, pretty sure it's 3 of them, went to Ireland. And they conquered the ruling class of Ireland, which was called the Tuatha De Danann. Tuatha De Danann. A lot of people want to say that's the tribe of, or the worshippers or the group of Diana. It's not. They're the tribe of Dan. Tuatha De Danann were the tribe of Dan. Not all the tribe, because the tribe of Dan went everywhere, okay? But they were very well learned. They had the most advanced technology that was available, and they were the traders. Dan left Egypt very early. My guess is they left Egypt, some of them, not the whole tribe, some of them left Egypt as the Phoenicians with their cousins who came from Phoenicia, and went everywhere. And everywhere they went, they changed the name and put their own name on it. You look at the rivers, there's 3 rivers on the steppes of Russia, the Dnieper, the Don, and there's one that I can't even pronounce. And they all 3 start with DN for Dan. The Danube River. The island of Sardinia, settled by Danites. through trade. Through trade. Okay? How about Sweden? How about Denmark? You see, everywhere Dan went, they changed the name to include their own name. You look at the British Isles, Scotland, Ireland, and the lower part of the British Isle, and you'll find about 5 or 6 Don rivers. Edinburgh. Dan is everywhere, okay? Because he was the pioneer, you know, in 1700 BC. He's all around the place. The Phoenicians even got to America at that time, all right? Barry Fell has 3 books of archaeology in America, and it's all Phoenician stuff, okay? Anyway, during the time that the Israelites were in Egypt, Dan and others migrated out of Egypt. Chalco is one name that you'll find in the encyclopedias, and Dara, Calco, or Chalco and Dara. You'll find those names in the Bible also. They established the city-states of Athens and Troy and other places in there. And Miletus also was established at around that period, in that 200 years or so. Maybe 100 to a little over 100 years before the Exodus that we hear of in the Bible, the Pharaoh, the official Pharaoh of Egypt, was living up in the high region, on the plateau in southern Egypt. Okay? That was called Upper Egypt. Even though it was it was Upper Egypt. And the Israelites ruled in Lower Egypt, down in the Delta area. Okay? Well, after 250 or so years of rule by foreigners, which happened to be the Hyksos, there are 2 waves of Hyksos foreign rulers. One was Shem, way early on, and the second was Joseph and his family. The Pharaoh said, hey, we had enough of this. We're getting you guys out of here. See? You're going to take over the whole country. Well, when they came down off of Upper Egypt to take over, you know, in a revolution, in a war, the royalty always, they're gone. You know, they're the first ones out the door. Boom. And Diodorus Siculus talks about 2 exoduses out of Egypt. One by ship and one over land. Moses was the one over land, and this exodus of the royalty out of Egypt when the Pharaoh came down to conquer, that was the first one. But that was way later. Earlier on, there were migrations. Now, the reason that some of these city-states were established was because when Joseph dies, who takes over the throne? A group doesn't take over, okay? We'll talk about that in a second. But only one person takes over, and the rest of his family has to sit around. See? What did they do? Some of them took some of their family and other people, and they went and migrated, establishing Troy and so forth. Now, who were those people? They were the ruling class, the ruling family of Egypt at the time. So we have to go back to Genesis 48 and 49 to establish who those people are. I'll tell you in advance, they're out of the tribe of Judah and from the family of Zara, Z-A-R-A-H, Zara. And here's how that worked out. First of all, in Genesis 48, Jacob is about to die. Pretty soon he's going to die. And Joseph, who's ruling Egypt, ruled for 80 years till he was 110 years old. He brings his 2 sons. Now his 2 sons were half Egyptian because he was married to the daughter of the high priest of On. an Egyptian. They were half Egyptian. He brings the two sons. Manasseh is the older son. Ephraim is the younger son. He positions Manasseh with his left hand toward Jacob, because when he faces Jacob, then Jacob's right hand is going to be facing Manasseh, the older. And by the law of primogeniture, the older son gets the birthright. He gets the most blessing. Okay? He's the one that carries on. Ephraim, he takes with his right hand and offers it to Jacob's left hand. But Jacob, he says, no. And he puts his hands crossed on the heads of the two boys. And Joseph says, oh, wait a minute, Pop, that's not right. That's not right. He said, cool down. Hold on. I got it right here. See? And then he says that he is going to adopt. I will adopt. They will be mine, he says, as Reuben, the firstborn, and Simeon, the secondborn. All of a sudden, Reuben and Simeon are out the window. See? They're now the third and fourth born, because Ephraim is counted as the firstborn, and Manasseh is counted as the secondborn. That's the first part. Jacob adopts them. Now they are officially Israelites. Period. They're in the family. Okay? Now there's 13 tribes. See? Actually there's 14 because there were 12 and now there's 2 more. Now there's 14, but Joseph dies and then there's 13. And Levi, if you remember, he's the priestly line and he doesn't get any inheritance when they went to the promised land. So there's only 12 tribes. Perfect government. That's the number of perfect government, 12. In Genesis 49 is when Jacob passes out the birthright. Okay, now we get to the good stuff. The birthright goes to Joseph. Well, Reuben, he did a bad thing and got passed over. Simeon and Levi, they were very violent in the early days and they lost out. Okay? So the birthright was going to pass to the fourth-born son, which was Judah. But it didn't. See? It went to Joseph. Now, what's in the birthright? Well, gosh, all the land, if there is any, all the cattle, if there is any, all the jewels, you know, all the servants, all the furniture, see? And anything that God gave to Pop went to the birthright recipient. All the promises that God gave to Abraham, he passed on to Isaac. Isaac passed those on to Jacob. Jacob passed them on to Joseph. The only thing that Judah got, poor Judah, was well, not poor Judah, he got to be the king, you know, but everything else, all the good stuff, all the prosperity went to Joseph. And because of that, and because Ephraim was the preeminent son of Joseph, he became the nobility of all the 12 tribes. You got all the nobles were from Ephraim, with the king being from Judah. Now there's one more little part to the story here. Oh, by the way, in addition to being the king, he was given the right to keep the law going, to give the law, be the lawgiver, not maker of the law. He didn't make the laws. The laws were already going to be made by God. He was the one that was going to keep them current, keep the people current with God's laws, the lawgiver. So Judah gets the scepter and the law giving, that's it. And all those promises from God, which we'll get to in a second, go to Joseph. And then when Joseph dies, they go to Ephraim. And Manasseh gets a huge blessing too, because in Genesis 48, when Jacob adopts the boys, he said, yeah, well, no, Ephraim is going to be a company of nations. Manasseh will be a great nation, that's true. Thousands, 10,000s of Manasseh and millions of Ephraim. Okay? But Judah is a lot older. Judah's already an adult and, you know, in his middle age when Joseph and Benjamin come along. They're older guys, you know? So by the time Joseph dies at 110 and gives up the throne, Judah's long gone. Who's going to take over? Somebody from Judah has to take over, because that's what Jacob said through God. Judah rules. So it's going to be Judah's boys. Judah's boy. Whoever the firstborn is going to be the rightful heir to the throne. And he's going to be the ruler. Who's that? You have to go to Genesis 38 to find out who that is. Because Judah had 3 sons. 2 of them were bad and died. The Bible says God killed them. Regardless, they died. And the last one was married to a woman named Tamar. Tamar was an Israelite. And Judah said, no, I tell you what, Tamar, you go back to your father's house. And when the boy is old enough to marry, then you can marry him. He didn't want him to get killed. See? Well, those 3 boys were out of a Canaanite wife. Well, God's not going to let a Canaanite rule his people. Okay? So, through a long story, Tamar has 2 children by Judah. He's not married to her, see? She plays the role of a harlot. And she gets pregnant. And she has twins. Twins. Well, the midwife, she knows they're going to be twins. So she's there, ready to mark the firstborn. I mean, the firstborn is extremely important. Family is extremely important at that time. Well, what happens is Zara's arm comes out of the womb. And the midwife says, oops, and she ties a red cord around his wrist. Okay? And you'll find the red hand in Ireland. I think it's up north in Munster. Red hand, it's their coat of arms, red hand. And that's where we get red tape, by the way. You know, that red cord that was tied around. But the hand went back in. Well, now what do we do? The other kid comes out whole first. And don't you know there was some kind of head-to-head combat with, you know, well, I was the first one born full. Well, no, but I came out first and I got the red cord. But Zara was the official firstborn. When Joseph dies, Zara takes over. And whether Zara is alive or not, his bloodline takes over. And Zara rules for, a couple of 100 years. See? But only one of them can rule, as I said before, and the other princes of the family say, oh, what am I going to do? And they take off and go to the city-states. And that's when Miletus is established, and Troy and Athens, and those people are Israelites. They're Judah, Zara, Israelites. There's a really good story in Geoffrey of Monmouth, the historian, his account of Brutus, who was a Trojan, who established a settlement in England, in Britain. He founded the city of Troy, New Troy, which the Romans later named London. He was already there. See? Judah will rule. And they were set up by God ahead of time so that when the lost tribes came over, starting in 650, they started to migrate to the west, there'd be a king already there to rule over them. But that's another story. Miletus was the king of that city-state, and his descendants went and founded cities, some settlements in Spain, as I said before, and then went to Ireland. So Jeremiah shows up, and they're all out of they're all out of Judah and Levi. Of course he lets them. He knows who Jeremiah is. See, he's got his credentials and stuff. He knows, so it's easy for him to accept him and marry in. Now, where this touches Ezekiel is when Ezekiel, he prophesies, I can't remember exactly, it's not 23, whatever the chapter is, he prophesies that take off the diadem, remove the crown, the high will be abased and the low will be exalted. And he's talking about the rulership. Well, Zedekiah was the high. He was the high king, see? While the Milesian king over in Ireland wasn't the high king of the Holy Land. He was the low, see? He wasn't ruling God's people, official God's people at the time. Zedekiah was. But Zedekiah was abased. The daughters of Zedekiah, out of the line of Pharez and David, go to Ireland. Jeremiah marries her off to the high king out of the line of Zara, Judah. And now we've got Pharez and Zara line combined together. They're together. And if you go to the history books and really do some deep study, you'll find that all of the kings and queens of Northwest Europe and the British Isles come out of that marriage. Queen Victoria was called the grandmother of Europe, see, because all those kings are related, see? So, of course, he accepts Jeremiah, and he accepts his teaching. He was God's representative, and God sent him there in the first place. Jeremiah, he maybe even told him that, you know. He said, God set you up here so that you could, you know, didn't you read the prophecy? Okay, maybe it's time for the next question here. How did this man change the face of Ireland? We just said that, okay? Laws, colleges, fair. Okay, the next thing that we want to take a look at is number 5, the question number 5. It says, so Jeremiah was the trustee of the bloodline and the throne of David, and was even part of the bloodline himself. Not quite, no. As I said, Jeremiah was a Levite. He had to be out of the priestly line, he had to be a Levite. But when you study David and the Davidic covenant, you find that not only did God say through Jacob, Judah will rule, but David was such a man after God's own heart that he said, your descendants, Judah's rule, but your descendants will never want a man to sit on the throne. There'll always be one of your seed will be ruling over Israelites because I like you so much. 2 Samuel is where you'll find that. Nathan comes to him and tells him that. So God's got a problem. See, because Zedekiah, out of the line of David, he's done. But the daughters are out of the line of David. So the throne, the official symbolic throne of Israel, is carried forward by the daughters, and they marry off to Judah, Zara in Ireland, and David's covenant from God is carried on. And Jeremiah is the trustee. Well, now how does that happen? How did Jeremiah just happen to be the guy who got the daughters? Why wasn't it whoever was the high priest at that time? Because Jeremiah was the great-grandfather-in-law of those daughters. He was the great-grandfather, he was the grandfather of Zedekiah. Whoa. How do you know that? Well, there's another little open door at the end of that one, okay? Because we don't know absolutely. We can only put together a lot of circumstantial evidence and a few verses for confirmation and say, this had to be the same guy. Okay? Let's get into that. Jeremiah turned out to be the guardian of the two daughters. And it says in 2 Kings 24:18. Let's go there. 2 Kings 24:18. No, I'm sorry, we'll back up to 23, just to show that there are two references to the same thing. There's another one coming up, but there's at least two. 23:31. 23:31. Jehoahaz was 20 years and 3 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal. Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. Who's Jeremiah of Libnah? He's a guy from Libnah. That's all we know. It doesn't say Jeremiah the prophet from Libnah. It says Jeremiah of Libnah. The first reference that we had, 2 Kings 24:18, says the same thing. Only it's in connection with Zedekiah this time. You see, because in Jeremiah 1, it says in verse 3, it came to pass in the days... verse 2. Verse 2. To whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It came also in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, unto the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah. So here you got the span of Jeremiah's prophecies. He was a prophet from Josiah all the way through the end of Zedekiah. Okay? And that's what it says in 2 Kings 24:18. Zedekiah was 20 and 1 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. Well, Hamutal had two boys, at least two. One was named Josiah and one was named Zedekiah. Actually, Zedekiah wasn't his real name, because that's the name that Babylon... See, Nebuchadnezzar set him up as a puppet king and changed his name to Zedekiah. So that's two Jeremiah of Libnahs, and both of them, one of the references clearly says that he was involved with Zedekiah. Okay? He had to do with Zedekiah. What we need to do is now go to Jeremiah 52. I think that's 52. Yeah, 52. 52:1. Okay? Zedekiah. This is just a repeat of the same thing. Okay? And that may be because I've been taught that chapter 52 wasn't written by Jeremiah. It was written by Ezra later on. And that might explain why this repeat is here. Okay? Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah in Libnah. Exactly the same as 24:18 in 2 Kings. If you have a Septuagint version of the Bible, you'll notice that verse 2 and 3 of chapter 52 aren't there. They're just not there. That may be one of the reasons why it was Ezra that wrote it and not Jeremiah. See? But at least we've got three different references that this Jeremiah of Libnah was connected to Zedekiah. Two references and one to Josiah, but all three of them name Hamutal as the mother. He was the father of Hamutal. Hamutal was the mother of Zedekiah. The Jeremiah of Libnah was the grandfather of Zedekiah. Grandfather-in-law, if you will. Grandfather-in-law. Never mind. In order to establish this a little bit more heavily, because that's too much of a loophole, right? Too much of a loophole. Have you got one of these? If you haven't, get $30 together and buy one tomorrow. Buy one tomorrow. Every Christian should have one of these. It's the very first book you should have after the Bible. Because how can you understand what the Bible really says if you're just going to trust some translator? Huh? You don't know what the original language says, you can't understand it properly. So, we go to Jeremiah in Strong's Concordance. Take a look at this page here. You see that Jeremiah starts here. I don't know whether you can read that or not. I don't think you can. Jeremiah starts there, and it goes all the way over to this column here, and then it goes on to the next page, and there's this column here is the last of Jeremiah. The very last reference to the name Jeremiah is in Daniel. Okay? And the first 14 references in Jeremiah on the first page that aren't in the book of Jeremiah are not in the book of Jeremiah, and those are the ones that we want to look at, because there's no reason to look at the Jeremiahs that are listed in the book of Jeremiah, because we know he wrote the book. Okay, what we're trying to establish is that the Jeremiah that wrote the book is indeed the one in the Bible that's talked about from Libnah. Okay? The first mention is in 1 Chronicles 5:24. And let's see, that talks about a man named Jeremiah of Manasseh. He's a Manassehite. He's not out of the tribe of Levi. That's not the Jeremiah that wrote the book. That's not the Jeremiah of Libnah, of the priestly line. Not the grandfather of Zedekiah. Not that Jeremiah. In 1 Chronicles 12, verse 4, verse 10, and verse 13 are listed the name Jeremiah 3 different times. In the context of this passage in here, in this chapter, the context is David at Ziklag when he's on the run. Okay, he's on the run, and if you remember some of the story, a lot of people who were dissatisfied, dissenters, against the government of Saul, came to David, and they rallied around David. That's what's happening here. Well, David lived 1000 BC. Jeremiah of Libnah, the grandfather of Zedekiah, was alive and an old man, a grandfather, in 600 BC. That's 400 years away. Can't be the same Jeremiah. Okay? None of the Jeremiah named in 1 Chronicles 12 can be the Jeremiah of Libnah that we're talking about here. Okay? Ezra? No. We'll go to 2 Chronicles. A few verses there. 2 Chronicles 35:25 talks about a Jeremiah at Josiah's death. Well, that fits perfectly, because Josiah is the son of Hamutal, and Jeremiah is the father of Hamutal. So it's the same Jeremiah that they're talking about here. Okay? Verse 12 of chapter 36 in Second Chronicles, it talks about Zedekiah being with Jeremiah. Same Jeremiah that we're looking at in the book of Jeremiah. That's the Jeremiah of Libnah. 2 Chronicles 36:21 and 22 also refer to the same Jeremiah that wrote the book, because it talks about Jeremiah's prophecy of the 70 years in Babylon. It's the same Jeremiah, right? Also, there's a reference that's not in the book of Jeremiah in Ezra 1:1, which does the same thing. It talks about the 70-year prophecy of the prophet Jeremiah. And then the last reference to Jeremiah, like I said, was Daniel, in Daniel, and that's the same kind of a reference. It's referencing Jeremiah's 70-year prophecy. Because it says right in Daniel, he was reading the books and he found Jeremiah's prophecy of 70 years. Whoa, wait a minute. They're coming out of here. In 70 years, they'll be out. I think it was, it's in the book of Daniel. Okay? The last four references that aren't in the book of Jeremiah are in the book of Nehemiah. Okay? Nehemiah 10:2, 12:1, 12:12, and 12:34 is where we find those names. Jeremiah. Is that the same Jeremiah? Can't possibly be. Can't possibly be. People didn't live that long by Jeremiah's time. Okay? They didn't live that long Joseph only lived to 110, Jacob lived 147, they didn't live. They were living down 100 years old maybe by Jeremiah's time in 600 BC. When was Nehemiah around? Nehemiah and Ezra were around after the captivity, and they came back, built the walls in the city, put down the foundation of the temple in 15 years. That's like 85 years after they went to Babylon. After they went to Babylon. And Jeremiah was already a grandfather, an old man. 85 or 90 years later, that's still the same Jeremiah? It's not. So that's the point. All the references that name a man named Jeremiah are not the Jeremiah of Libnah, except where it says the Jeremiah of Libnah, and Jeremiah of Libnah is always connected to Zedekiah. So it's way around the side door, and it's still circumstantial evidence, but I believe it. I'm telling you, I believe it. It was the same Jeremiah. The same Jeremiah that in the book of Jeremiah takes the daughters of the king, and it doesn't say the king Zedekiah, it just says the daughters of the king. See, leaves that little loophole there. Well, that wasn't. I just received an email last night that says, no, that stuff about Jeremiah, that's a bunch of junk. You're wrong about that. Those daughters were the daughters of Josiah. And they were the daughters of Zedekiah. They couldn't be the daughters of Josiah. They were the king's daughters. Josiah was gone. Okay? The same Jeremiah. Oh boy, I think that was the last question, wasn't it? Yeah. Oh, I found something really interesting. Here's another little bit of evidence, little snippet, Let's play a little game. We'll play a little game. You're a father, okay? You're going to have a child. Your wife goes to the hospital. A girl is born. Oh, it's a girl. Oh, a girl. I like to have a girl. What do you name the girl? Would you, at any stretch of the imagination, name that girl Mary? Sure. Lucy? Sure. Rebecca? Sure. Father-in-law of protection? What? Would you name your daughter father-in-law of protection? No, I don't think anybody in history ever named their daughter father-in-law of protection except Jeremiah. Look up Hamutel in any good dictionary, Strong's Concordance, Who's Who in the Bible, any number of books that tell the definition of the name Hamutel. And it means father-in-law. That's one part. That's a two-word word, a compound word. Father-in-law of dew. D-E-W is what it says in Strong's Concordance. It's just dew, but when you extend that out for the research, you find that the dew means a covering, and that's where the protection comes in. One of my references says father-in-law of protection, and then I went to Strong and it said dew, and I said, well, wait, the dew, but then it says as in covering, protecting. Jeremiah of Libnah named Hamutel the father-in-law of protection. That's what Jeremiah was. He was the father-in-law of protection. Don't you think that he had word from God that something was going to happen like that? Don't you think that was? Why would Jeremiah, when Zedekiah put him in the pit, okay, the people said, hey, get rid of this guy. He's telling us to go to Babylon. He's going to get us all killed. Get rid of him. Well, he couldn't kill him, He was his prophet in the first place and his grandfather in the second place, so he threw him in the pit. What does Jeremiah do? Does he say, oh, poor me, I'm a goner? He says, hey, Baruch, go buy some land over here as my down payment on the fact that I'm going to be okay. Okay? Father-in-law protection, Hamutel. Well, did Jeremiah go to Ireland? He sure did. He sure did. And he took the daughter, one of the daughters of Zedekiah, along with him, married him off to Yoked Haramon, High King of Ireland. And the promise of God, the Davidic covenant, and the covenant to Judah through Jacob was fulfilled and kept on being fulfilled. God is not a liar. He doesn't say things idly. He never says, oops, right? Come on, Well, I don't know whether you believe that Jeremiah went to Ireland or not. I do hope two things. One, I hope you know that I believe he went to Ireland, and I also hope that you've got enough evidence to get you into some research on your own. Because if you take what I said as gospel and start spreading it around, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. You've got to do your own research. You've got to have 100 hours of research on Jeremiah alone to be able to back up anything you say to anyone. You can't just say, oh, hey, Jeremiah went to Ireland, and he took the stone, the coronation stone with him, and he took the harp of David with him, and that's why the harp is on the Irish flag. Did you know the Irish flag had a harp on it? Well, sure, it's on there. Sure, Jeremiah brought that. Get out of here. You can't bottom line people. The minute you bottom line somebody, they say, no, and then you have to say, oh, but. And how can you lay out 100 hours of research in a couple of sentences? You have to do your own research before you understand it enough to let somebody else understand it. And the way God works is that, you remember the old saying, When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That's the way it works, in reverse. When the teacher is ready, the student will appear. When you've got enough information on a subject to be able to give understanding of that subject to somebody else, somebody's going to come and ask you a question. Why? Because Jesus said, no one comes to God save the Father draw him. The Holy Spirit's job is to draw people to God. Now, he can't draw people to God. He's got to draw people to somebody who can show them God. And that's you after you do your research. Somebody's going to ask you a question. Lost tribes. A wonderful study. Wonderful study. As I said at the beginning, it proves God's reality. And then what does that do? It gives you the confidence to act on the stuff that God has said other places that will save your soul. You can't prove that when you act in trust, God will put his Spirit inside your body. But that's what Paul's constant message is. The indwelling of the Spirit. Constant message. His other constant message is you're saved by grace, that's true, through faith. And when you do a deep study on grace, you find it isn't just God's beneficence. God sits up there and he says, oh, you can have this. Grace is that power. That's the Spirit, the power of God put inside you. That's what saves you. When the Spirit is inside your body, God looks at you as though you're saved. He doesn't see all the junk that's inside there, see? That Spirit covers you over and he sees himself and he says, Jack, you're okay. Come home. You can't get the Spirit inside your body without faithing. Put an ing on faithing. It's not belief. It absolutely is not belief. John 3:16. Boy, the devil has done a wonderful job of diverting Christians away from God by convincing them through John 3:16 that all they have to do is believe in God and they're saved. Let me ask you one question. Is the devil saved? I know there are some people that say, in the end, everybody gets back in, even the devil. No, because God's not a liar, and God said, the hot place is where the devil goes. Okay? The devil, he believes in God more than I do. He's seen him. He knows there's a God, way more than I do. He's not saved, and he won't be saved. Faith and the word believe all come from the same root in Greek, P-I-S-T. Pistis is the word for faith. Pistuo is the word for belief. And they both come from a primary verb, pytho, 3982 in Strong's Concordance. It's a primary verb. That means it's a believing action. John really said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever acts on his belief in him shall have everlasting life. And that's Paul's main message. We're saved by faith. We're sanctified by faith. We're justified, just like God, by faith. We gain righteousness. God is the only person that's righteous. We can't be righteous, but he looks at us as righteous when we faith. F-A-I-T-H-E. It's just like the word bath and bathe. Okay? Bathe is a verb. Bath is also a verb. It's a noun that describes the action of the verb. Faithing is what saves us. It's what puts God's Spirit inside our bodies. Well, Rob, thanks again for letting me share all this with you and whoever else might be listening or watching. It's been a real pleasure. And I've got a whole website full of stuff on the Lost Tribes and many other different subjects, pages and hundreds of pages up there, and lots of audio, radio shows and things that you can download. The website link address is STAG, Straight Talk About God, stag.ws, stag.ws. Thank you. Good night.